ہیں. اٹھے طوفان چلے آندھی زمین گردش کرے پھر بھی رہے اونچا علم جس کا اسے عباس کہتے ہیں. رہے اونچا علم جس کا اسے عباس کہتے ہیں. جسے سجدے کرے سجدہ اسے عباس کہتے ہیں. صلوات پر محمد.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. جزاک اللہ فدا صاحب. We have now Ali Rizvi from USA. I would request Ali Rizvi to recite salam.
آپ کی آواز نہیں آ رہی علی بھائی.
جی السلام علیکم. میری آواز آ رہی ہے آپ؟
جی اب آ رہی ہے ماشاءاللہ.
جی السلام علیکم سب کو. یاد مدد.
وعلیکم السلام.
ایک صلوات پڑھ دیں محمد و آل محمد پر. ایک سلام.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد.
غم حسین ہم کو ہے اپنی جان سے پیارا.
سبحان اللہ.
غم حسین قائم رہے جہاں میں خدایا. غم حسین ہم کو ہے اپنی جان سے پیارا. غم حسین روزے الست پوچھا گیا کیا پسند ہے. روزے الست پوچھا گیا کیا پسند ہے. بے اختیار ہوں نے پکارا.
سبحان اللہ.
غم حسین اور جب چاہا سیدہ کے قدم آئیں گھر میرے. جب چاہا سیدہ کے قدم آئیں گھر میرے. فرش عذاب بچھایا منایا.
سبحان اللہ.
غم حسین ہم کو ہے اپنی جان سے پیارا. پیش خدا کھڑا تھا میں شرمندہ سر جھکائے. پیش خدا کھڑا تھا میں شرمندہ سر جھکائے. کام سے آڑے وقت میں آیا. ہمیں
کیا کہنا. سبحان اللہ.
بخشش کا میری حشر میں سامان ہو گیا.
الحمدللہ.
بخشش کا میری حشر میں سامان ہو گیا. میزان پر عمل کے جو رکھا ہمیں حسین
سلامت رہے بھائی.
ہم کو ہے اپنی جان سے پیارا اور تاریکیوں نے گھیر لیا جب حیات کو تاریکیوں نے گھیر لیا جب حیات کو آیا جہاں میں بل کے اجالا حسین
سلامت رہیے.
رے کیسا ستم ہے باپ کو بیٹی نہ رو سکی رے کیسا ستم ہے باپ کو بیٹی نہ رو سکی ہائے منا سکینہ سکینہ ہمیں حسین ہم کو ہے اپنی جان سے پیارا غم حسین. اللہم صلی
علی محمد وعلی محمد. جزاک اللہ علی بھائی، آپ نے یاد تازہ کر دی سچے بھائی کی. تمام ریسائٹرز کے لیے ایک بلند تر صلوات، خاص طور پہ علی رضوی کے لیے، فدا حسین اور امیر بھائی کے لیے، سب کے لیے ایک نیا صلوات.
صلی اللہ محمد.
Before I invite Syed Hassan Abdi for his speech, you are all requested to recite one Surah Fatiha for Syed Waqar Ali Abdi, son of Syed Zaigham Ali Abdi, or Syed Mohsin Raza, and all Marhumeen of Abdi family, one Surah Fatiha.
اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, that this is a Esaal Sawab Majlis for Waqar Ali Abdi. He passed away last year in Manchester, UK. It is his anniversary, and Hassan is going to recite a Majlis. So I would request Syed Hassan Ali Abdi to start his speech.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتقسمين بولاية سيدي أمير المؤمنين عليه الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد.
الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله.
آپ کی ویڈیو نہیں آ رہی مجھے.
ویڈیو نہیں آ رہی
جی.
Hassan, set it to speaker view or spotlight video to you.
اب آ رہی ہے.
اب آ رہی ہے.
جی اب بسم اللہ.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد اللهم صل
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وعجل خيرنا.
Respected scholars, elders, brothers, and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Before I begin today with today's majlis, as we did before, please join me in reciting Surah Fatiha for the marhum Syed Waqar Ali Abidi Ibn Syed Zaigham Ali Abidi, and include all your marhumin in this Surah Fatiha too, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Inshallah, today's majlis, I would like to go over a very important topic, a very important piece that we should keep in our daily lives as true Muslims. During the holy month of Ramadan, I had the opportunity of reciting a majlis online about during the time of Ramadan, and the majlis was about a topic of al-khawfi or raja, about hope and fear, and how we can balance both of those to lead the lives that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly wants us to live, how He wants us to be His abds. So today, inshallah, I would like to focus on that. During that majalis, we focused mainly on the aspect of hope. Today, inshallah, continuing on that, I would like to focus on the concept of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how can we fear Him truly, and what is the true fear of Allah, and how can we use this fear to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be the true abds, as I said earlier, like He wants us to be. So there's an ayat in the Holy Quran in Surah Fatiha where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself, He says something very beautiful in this Holy Quran. He says, and only Allah's knowledgeable servants fear Him. Allah is majestic and all pardoning. What is Allah? Remember, keep in mind our topic is fear of Allah. But look in Surah Fatiha, which is the 35th chapter of the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a message here. What is He saying? He's saying that only Allah's knowledgeable servants, only those who are knowledgeable, they fear Him. Why? Because Allah is majestic and all pardoning. So you see that Allah is giving you a lesson even when He is telling you to fear Him. To have that khawf of Allah, Allah is giving you a lesson that those who fear Him are definitely those who are knowledgeable, have the aql, they fear Him. And why should you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Allah is majestic and He is all pardoning. He has this majesty and He is Rahman Rahim, Ghafur Rahim. He will always forgive you. You should fear Allah, have the fear of Allah, but always remember that He will forgive you. So inshallah today we will look at what are the advantages of fear. What are some benefits of having that khawf of Allah, that fear of Allah in our hearts? We'll look at various ayat of the Quran. We'll look at various verses of the Quran, and we'll look at the ahadith of the Masumeen alayhi salatu wasalam. We will look at these ahadith. We will look at the Quran to see what are these holy personalities telling us about. What is the fear? What is the khawf of Allah truly? So you see, what is fear of God? I mentioned this Quranic ayat in front of you. So what can we derive? What could be the fear of God? You see, the fear of God, it's like this thing in the back of our heads, this thing in the back of our minds, you know, this anxious mental feeling that we have in the back of your mind. You know, when you have somebody, if I were to give you an example, if you have somebody of authority over you, such as your parents, your grandparents, anybody, or at work, your boss, Anybody who has power or authority over you, and that you respect, and that you know this person has this certain type of authority over me, you fear that person, correct? You have that fear inside of you. You have this thing inside of your mind all the time that, you know, this person has authority over me, power over me. I shouldn't do anything that upsets him. Now, subhanAllah, look how we can use this in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the Supreme Lord. You know, who is, as the Quranic ayat says, is the most majestic, is the most pardoning. This fear that you have for those those people who have power over us, we should use that for Allah too. That is being the true abd of Allah. That we should have this in the back of our mind all the time. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. He is my Lord, and I need to make sure that I have this fear of Him. The fear of Allah, khawf of Allah, is this thing in the back of my mind, in the back of my head all the time, where I'm thinking of the punishment, of the azab of Allah, of the azab of nar, of all of these things. I'm thinking of them. That is what this punishment, that is what this fear is. It's the thing that's always with you. And the Quran, as I mentioned, emphasizes this a lot too. There's a hadith that you can find from Al-Wafi, which is also quoted from Al-Kafi, volume 3, page 57. In this, you can see that in this ahadith, the ahadith goes as such: you will not be the true believer unless you are fearful of God. What is the ahadith saying here? That you will not be the complete mu'min, the true believer that Allah wants you to be, unless you fear God and you fear His punishment, you fear His adhab. And there's another stipulation, another condition: you won't be a true believer unless you have the khawf of Allah, you fear the adhab, and you have to be hopeful for His reward, for His jaza, for all of His good actions that He will give to you. So the hadith is telling us that you will not be true, you will not be a true fearful, and you will not be a true hopeful unless, how can you become truly hopeful? How can you become truly fearful? Then what is the condition that the hadith is telling you? The hadith is telling you that how do you become truly fearful and truly hopeful? You have to become truly fearful, you have to avoid every sin, every dhunub, every bad action, and then you'll be truly fearful. And how do you become truly hopeful? You become truly hopeful by working towards the good deeds, by the hasanat, by the good actions that Allah wants us to do. That's how you become truly hopeful. And that is how you stay truly fearful. There's another story that I would like to do that will help you understanding about this concept of fear, khawf of Allah, and what should be the true khawf, and how we can lead our lives, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to when we use this khawf, as I mentioned earlier. There's a story in the books from a very wise man, they say, and he says, how poor is man? You know, mankind, humankind, insan, how poor is insan? Why? Because had he feared the fire of hell, the adhab and nar, in the same way as he feared poverty, then he would have been saved from both. He would have been saved from poverty, and he would have been saved from the adhab and nar. If this man was as scared of poverty, imagine, Allahu Akbar, this wise man is telling you, if you were scared of the punishment, the adhab and nar, as the same as you were with poverty, then we would be saved from both, but we're not, unfortunately. And then what does he tell us? Then the story goes on and he says, and had insan desired for paradise, the same way he desired for the worldly pleasures, the hubb dunya, then he would have got both. He would have got Jannah and he would have got the success in this world. But he was not striving. He wasn't working towards this hubb of the akhirah. You know, he wasn't working on his akhirah insan. They were more focused on his worldly life, about our rizq. You know, one thing, my dear brothers and sisters, and everybody who's listening, that's very important. You've heard from our great scholars that this rizq, the sustainer, the sustenance that we get is from the sustainer, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives us all of this rizq. So it's not something we should, always be worried about. If we are true abds of Allah, Allah takes care of us. There's no doubt in that. And this is what this story I was trying to explain to you is telling us. That only if we focused more on the akhirah, focused more on the day of judgment, on our deeds, on our grave, then Allah will take care of this world for us. And then he says, and he would have won both. As you see, the man says in the story twice, he would have won both things. He would have won this dunya and akhirah. So you see, the story supplements the hadith there that's telling us that make sure when you have the khawf of Allah, you're also having balancing fear and hope. That's what I would like to continue with, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So you see, khawf in Allah and hope in Allah should be balanced. Today we're focusing on the khawf. What is the true khawf in Allah? So khawf, when you look at the books, of our scholars, khawf is one of the noble traits also. It can be used as a noble trait, and it deserves a lot of praise. It deserves a lot of praise if this trait is used correctly and it's characterized correctly. What do I mean by this? How can, you might ask me, one of our youth might ask me, one of the young children might ask me, what do you mean fear can be used positively? Or fear is a noble trait? My dear brothers and sisters, fear is a noble trait and it can be used positively. How? And how can it be used positively in the way to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like I said earlier, it is all about moderation, balancing this fear and balancing this hope. That is how this fear can be used positively. If we balance these two, then you'll see that, your soul, your nafs, your being will elevate to a station that you want it to be. You'll get closer to Allah in ways that you weren't when you weren't using this khawf and this hope and this raja correctly. So again, the important point from today, I would like to reiterate again, is that keeping it in moderation, this hope and this fear, that is when this noble trait is something that could be used correctly. For example, now, how can this fear be used negatively? How can fear cause, damage to the insan? This khawf of Allah. This is how it can cause damage. It causes despair. Despair meaning it causes the insan to lose its way when you start deviating because of this khawf. Remember how I said keep that balance between hope and fear? Now this fear can be bad for the insan if we start deviating from Allah. What does this mean? So for example, I would say that, I have so many dhunub, I have so many sins that Allah will never forgive me. And nobody, Allah will not look at me. You start to become one who is, scared of Allah in a way that you start deviating. You start moving away from the path of Allah. This will damage the insan, this type of khawf. This is not the khawf I would like to talk about today and we're focusing on today. We're focusing on the khawf that brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This khawf where we, start deviating, we leave the religion of Islam, na'udhu billah, or we start going away from the path of Allah, not doing the wajibat, not doing what He tells us to do. That's when the khawf is wrong. That's when that balance is no longer there between raja and khawf. Now you're just deviating. You're starting to do acts of disobedience. So there's a hadith from Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, hope for Allah in a form that does not draw you away from the commitment of acts of disobedience. He says, hope for Him in a way so you do not start going into the acts of disobedience. And fear Him so that you do not despair. Fear Him in a way that you do not despair of His mercy. Have hope for Him and have this type of hope that you don't start disobeying Him. And have this type of fear. The fear should be what your Imam is telling you is that the fear should be this, that you do not start despairing of His mercy, of His rahmah. You start forgetting about His mercy. That should be the fear that you have of Allah. That is the correct way to do have the khawf of Allah, the fear of Allah. So to make sure that, we should remember even the Holy Quran, if you, everybody who's watching and everybody who's listening, if you remember the ayat of the Quran in Surah Fatiha that we mentioned, what did it say? Only the knowledgeable fear Allah because He is majestic and all pardoning. Ghafur Rahim. The Imam here, if you look at the words of the Imams, they're not different from they do not say something that Allah is not everything that in the Holy Quran. These Imams are making it easier for us to understand through their ahadith. The Imam is making it easier for you to understand that Allah is all pardoning. Have that khawf, but do not despair of His mercy. Do not think that Allah will never forgive you. That should be the true type of fear. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, as we said, there's advantages. This is a noble trait if you think about it. Khawf, if it's used in the correct way. So what is the correct way that khawf can be used, fear can be used? We saw the hadith of the Imam where he's telling us to balance these feelings of khawf and fear correctly. But how can it be used as an advantage then? How can I use khawf to get closer to Allah? You know, if you look at those who are, if you look at those great scholars of yours, those arifs of yours, or those beings who have practiced this act of doing true khawf and raja of Allah, you'll see their lives. You'll see that what is very important for the advantage of khawf is that it depends on something. It depends that this noble trait of khawf, if the insan is using it, implementing it in their lives correctly or not. That's the one stipulation of the advantage of khawf. That are we using the khawf, the fear of Allah, in our lives correctly, in the way that the Imams and the Quran is telling us to do. And then it will have a lasting effect on our personalities. If we use this khawf correctly. What does that mean again? Not to deviate from Allah's path, not to start disobeying Allah, not to start, going against the commandments of Allah. That is the correct way of using khawf. So, and in many ahadith, I would like to mention here, and many books about ethics, how the Ahlul Bayt are ethical role models, and many books of ethics in our madhab, you can see that this noble trait is one of the most important ones, khawf, because it plays a big role, a very huge role in changing the insan, in changing the insan's fitrah, in changing their attitude, in changing the way they are in their lives. This element of khawf. So in books, as I mentioned, this holds the first place among the noble traits, khawf, because it is mending you, it is changing you to make sure that you start acting in the correct way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to, and to be doing the ita'at and the obedience of God in the correct way. So this, like I said in the beginning, this feeling of fear which is in the back of your head, that Allah is gonna punish us, should be used in the correct way so that we can start obeying Him and not disobey Him. There's another hadith now here that I would like to share that helps us understand how this feeling of fear, this khawf, can take us from this level to the level of the angels. How this khawf can change you, mend you, so that you go from this stage of ours to the stage of the angels. What is that? There's a very famous hadith that you have heard from the members a lot, from many of your scholars. I would like to just talk about it again. With Allah salawat ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This hadith is from Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, where he says, surely Allah has characterized the angels by intellect. Now we're talking about what? We're talking about how can we take advantage of this khawf to change and take our nafs, our being, to that level of the angels, to that higher level where Allah wants us to be. And your first Imam is telling you. You've heard it a lot, just to go over it again, inshallah. He says that he has characterized the angels by intellect, but he hasn't given them desire. And he characterized the animals with desire without reason. What does this mean? He gives the angels aql, but he doesn't give them desire or shahwa. He gives the animals desire shahwa, but he doesn't give them aql. He doesn't give them reason. Now look at what Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying about you, the insan. He's telling you the status of insan. Insan is such that he's exalted so much, he is put high so much by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he is bestowed with both. We have aql and we have this desire and this shahwa. We have these desires. It is now the Imam is telling you, if our aql dominates our desires, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. This aql should dominate our desires. We rise above the state of the angels, like I said. The Imam is telling you. But if we take that shahwa, that desire, and it dominates our aql, we drop down to the level of the animals. You've heard this ahadith many times. It's found in Ilal al-Sha'ari, the book. You can find this ahadith. But what is very important here is how this khawf can elevate you, take you to the next level of the angels. What again is important then? Using the akal more than we use the shahwa and the desire. Don't let these desires take over us. Don't let them command us. There's a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen that says, to tame the nafs, to keep the nafs tamed. If we don't, then what's the difference? You see the hadith is in front of you. The Quranic ayat is in front of you. What's the difference then? What is insan? Insan has both traits. But insan balances the shahwa and the akal, the intellect and the desire. That is what I want to bring across to you today, my dear brothers and sisters. That the khawf of Allah does this for us. We know that Allah is, Rahman Rahim. He's Ghafoor Rahim, all forgiving. But we also know that He is our supreme Lord. He is our Lord who is going to punish us if we disobey Him, if we go against His actions. Deliberately, if we do it, then we're not using khawf and raja correctly. By deliberately, I mean if on purpose, I'm going against the will of Allah, I'm going against the actions of Allah, and then I say, oh no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me. My dear brothers and sisters, this is not the correct way that the khawf and hope should be used. Where we are saying that, I can disobey Allah, and then I can come the next day and Allah will forgive me if I keep doing that sin again and again. If you like take an example in layman term or modern terms, it's like, it's something I've explained to my students in madrasa when I've taught in Sunday madrasa. I brought this example up for them also, and I thought it would be useful to be used here too, about this concept of Allah and disobeying Him. I said to them, how we're living in this country and we live in our different countries, wherever you are, you have a law that you have to follow. You have a system that you have to follow. And you have a government that you're afraid of. You're afraid of these systems of power. You don't want to go against them. You don't want to break the law, right? You don't want to do anything that breaks the law. Well, look at, like I said before, Allah is the supreme Lord. Allah is the highest of high. How can we ever, as insan, think that we can go against His commandments? If we're so scared of these powers, right? If we're scared of, the police or people who are acting law, taking this law and enforcing it on us, then Allah is also giving you a Sharia, a law to follow. With this law, He's saying, and look how Rahman and Rahim He is. He's saying, even with this law that you have to follow, you should have the khawf inside of your hearts, O insan, of me. But remember, I am Rahman and Rahim. Remember, I'm all forgiving. He keeps telling you that. So make sure, just as you're scared, like I said, of power, of people of authority, people with power over you, make sure you have that khawf, that true khawf, pure khawf of Allah inside of you too. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So I hope, inshallah, everybody who is watching online, this is something that we're benefiting from, where we're learning about how the khawf of Allah can be used in the true manner, in the true way that He wants us to use it, so that we can, like we said, like the hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen is telling us, we can ascend from this level and go to the level of the angels, or we can, if we do not use it properly, if we use our desires and we do not have the true khawf in Allah, we can drop to the level of the animals. To continue, inshallah, talking about the advantages of khawf and how khawf can be used correctly, we see that those who have implemented true khawf in their lives, look at their lives and how they lead them. You see that if you look at someone who understood the khawf in Allah and how to have true khawf in Allah, that person who's understood it, look at their lives. What do? You see, when a suffering falls upon them, a musibah falls upon them, anything that is tough falls upon them, you'll see these people. You see this a lot in our ulama. What do? They've understood the true hope and khawf in Allah and doing the true ita'at of Allah. These great ayatullahs, these great ulama of ours, may Allah preserve their lives. That what do when any musibah comes upon them? They know that Allah is testing us, and they know that this is to continue their acts of obedience to Allah. Even if any trial, any tribulation comes upon these people, they don't waver, they don't leave the path of Allah, they stay on Sirat al-Mustaqim, they stay steadfast on the path of Allah, and their obedience grows even more. They start doing more ita'at of Allah. They do not get scared. Even if you look at our holy imams, any a musibah that fell upon them, they would go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and give thanks to Him. That is the maqam of our imams, my dear brothers and sisters, and our aima, that they're trying to teach us. That listen, when you know what is the advantage of khawf in Allah, you know that any trial or tribulation that comes upon you, give thanks to Him. Because it is a test for you. And if you pass that test, if you go through and you fight through that musibah, that trial, that tribulation, you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give abundant blessings to you. And you see these people who have true khawf and who have the true khawf of Allah, what is another thing they do, which is very important? They know how bad that sin is. They know the bitterness, they know the sweetness. The sins are sweet. They know that sins are something that attract you. They know the sweetness of it. And they know that even though the sin is sweet, it's a disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They know that they fear His wrath in the correct way and they stay away. That's how they use khawf positively. They know that Allah, if we go towards these sins, the sweetness of the sins, then Allah will punish us. Allah will send His adhab on us. They stay away. That, my dear brothers and sisters, is the true khawf that we want to talk about today. That is how you balance al-khawfi raja, hope and fear. Make sure in our daily lives, and I remind myself before I remind you, that we keep this khawf in our hearts, that Allah is always there, and we don't use khawf, we don't misuse it, where we start taking things for granted now to billah. And inshallah, I would like to discuss something with you that is very important. If you look at all the current, we're talking about khawf and true khawf in Allah. If you look at all the current calamities, you look at, for example, what do I mean by this? You look at, disorder in this world. You look at crime in this world. You look at mental perplexity in this world where humankind is confused. They're going astray. What is the reason for this suffering for insan and for mankind? You go to the Holy Quran, like I said, two beautiful things that are left with us, the ahadith of the Masumeen and the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there. Now you go and look at the Holy Quran. What does it tell you about this? It says that it says in chapter 7, verse 96 of the Holy Quran, that had the people of the towns believed in our revelations, Allah is saying, and they maintained piety, what would happen? They would have, Allah says, we would certainly shower them with blessings if they believed. But what did they do? They called our revelations, our wahi, our commands, lies. These people, that's what they did. They said they're lies. Thus, what did Allah do to them? He sent adhab on them. He sent torment on them for their evil deeds, for the dhunub. So, like I said, all of the suffering that humankind is doing, what are they doing? They're going away from the path of Allah. They're going away from the sayings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They're going away from the commandments. Allah is telling you in chapter 7, verse 96, clearly that had mankind stayed on the path that I told them to and had the true khawf of me in their hearts, then I would have showered them with blessings, given them the most abundant blessings they couldn't even imagine. But what did they do? They had, as you say, they had the feeling of arrogance inside of them, and they said, this is lies. This, whatever Allah is telling us, this is a lie, and Allah sent His adhab. My respected viewers, my dear brothers and sisters, if we only ponder on the ayat of the Quran and the hadith of the Masumeen, we can see how beautifully it explains to us how we should lead our lives, how we should have this khawf and this fear and this hope of Allah in our hearts to get, like Amir al-Mu'mineen said, to that level of the angels, to take this being of ours, this nafs of mine, to a being that Allah wants us to be, how Allah wants us to worship Him. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, inshallah, to recap, before we move to Masayib, you see that two things that we can learn. Then, how do we feel fear? How can we feel fearful? What is something that we can do? Like I said, you can listen to these, ayat of the Quran. You can look at the ahadith of the Masumeen alayhi salatu wasalam, and you can ponder upon them, and that makes you fearful when you see what they say. And we will look at one before we go to the Masayib, inshallah. And what else? You can also look at those ulama of yours, look at the lives of the imams, of the prophets who were fearful, and see how they were submitting to Allah. They were doing the ita'at of Allah. They were doing the obedience to Allah, and look at those lives, study those lives, and see how they're fearing Allah, and then implement them in our lives. Like I said, look at the sayings of the Imams. If you look at Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There's a very, as you know, Imam, the Mazloom Imam has many munajats, many du'as, many supplications. I would like to look at one of them today before we move to Masayib, and it will basically put in a nutshell what we talked about today about khawf of Allah and the true khawf of Allah. The Imam alayhi salam, he in his supplication, what does he say? It will break your heart. Even the first sentence, my dear brothers and sisters, will break your heart. He says, I weep. And why do I not weep? Well, I do not know what will be my destiny. Allahu Akbar. Imagine the Imam is saying, your Imam is saying that I weep and I weep. And why do I weep? Because I do not know what my destiny will be. He says, I see my soul cheat me. He says, I see this nafs cheat me and my days deceive me. And he says, the wings of death are flapping over my head. And why do I not weep? He says, why? The Imam is saying, why should I not cry? I weep for the departure of my soul, for the gloominess of my grave, for the emptiness of the grave, for the narrowness of the grave. Allahu Akbar. For the interrogation of Munkar and Nakir. He fears the interrogation. And for my going out of my grave naked, humble, and overburdened. I will look once to my right and once to my left, while the creatures will have their own concern. And then the ayat of the Quran is in this supplication. The 80th chapter of the Quran, verse 37 to 41. For on that day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, for on that day, everyone will be completely engrossed in his own concerns. Some faces on that day will be radiant, laughing and joyous, but others will be gloomy and covered by darkness. Allahu Akbar. My dear brothers and sisters, everybody who's viewing, inshallah, this is a supplication from the Imam that I wanted to leave with you as we move to Masayib, because it teaches you that if these Imams of ours, these Aima of ours, are going back to Allah in the state of fear and khawf, then what are we? What am I? Why should I not have that true khawf in Allah? I should definitely have that true khawf in Allah, because if I have that, then I will understand how to be the abd of Allah. I should weep. Why? The Imam is telling you, you should fear and weep. Why? Because you will be in that grave one day. You will be left alone with nobody, with your loved ones here. This is a Majlis for Esaal Sawab of the marhum. May Allah give him a high rank in Jannah, inshallah, and all your marhumin and everybody's marhumin, inshallah. May they have the highest rank in Jannah with the Masumeen. This Majlis of Esaal Sawab, this Majlis that we were holding today, this is why it is important. Because we'll be left in our graves. We'll be left, and our loved ones will be doing majlis for us. They will hold majlis for us. They will read a couple of du'as for us. But once we have that true khawf of Allah in our hearts, that's how we will survive, the later half of our lives, or the true journey, as many of our scholars say, and as many of our books, our real life, which is the hereafter, the akhirah. That life is our real life. And if we have that khawf in Allah in our hearts, then we can see how that will elevate us, inshallah. As we move to Masayib, I would like to once again thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me this opportunity to remember Him tabaraka ta'ala through the Quranic ayat, through the ahadith of the Masumeen alayhi salatu wasalam. And I hope everybody who is viewing gains something about the khawf of Allah, how we should fear Allah, and how the Masumeen alayhi salatu wasalam teach us to fear Allah, and we implement this in our daily lives. And we learn how to elevate our being from that being of, this lowly level to the level of the angels. Inshallah, that is our dua, that Allah, say, Ya Allah, help us. We know you're Ghafur Rahim. We know you're all forgiving, all pardoning, but we know you are our master. You are our Rabb, and we know that we have to have the khawf of you in our hearts, and we ask you to help us be the true abd that you want us to be. Inshallah, this majalis was organized for the Esaal Sawab of the marhum Syed Waqar Ali Abdi, who was my maternal uncle. And as Allah's uncle mentioned in the beginning, it has been 1 year now since the death of our uncle. What breaks the heart, when we moved to Musiba is that when I looked at him and his life, and when I pondered him, I sat down to talk about, what topic should I choose when I'm talking in Esaal Sawab Majlis. When you look at the life of the marhum, you see that he was one who led his life in a way that he made sure that not just his parents, not just his siblings, not just his, his nieces and his nephews, everybody he knew, everybody he talked to, everybody he had an interaction with, had nothing but great words to say about him, had nothing but praise to say about him, had love towards him. They would feel that whenever they were around him, he was that great person that you could find comfort around. And my dear brothers and sisters and viewers, just for you to, understand that when we move to Masa'ib, this is something, the Aza of Abu Abdullah and the Aza of, the Masumeen alayhi salatu wasalam, is that Aza, when we mix it or when we gather together to remember our loved ones, Allah elevates the status, inshallah. Because we're remembering those. Our loss is small compared to the loss of Abu Abdullah in the lands of Karbala. You cannot compare and you cannot even imagine the pain that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein had to go through during the days of Ashura and the days of Karbala. As I said, the marhum was such that his parents, when you talk to his parents, is someone who, they keep praising whenever you talk about him. And that is what I wanted to mention. That is how we should lead our lives. And that is what I learned from the marhum, is how you should lead your life. That before, when you leave, and it's many of the sayings that that when you leave, people will remember you. The people will mourn for you. And the people will see that you were truly the way Allah wanted you to be. That is how Allah wants us to be. That keep everybody with you in an amazing way where they remember you. But as I said, my dear brothers and sisters, the musibah of Abu Abdullah on the lands of Karbala, when we sit down and we do the azah today, inshallah, we'll think about one young Najawan of Abu Abdullah. When you think about young people who pass away from your lives, there is one young personality on the lands of Karbala, on the Maidan of Karbala, that breaks your heart. And when you look at this personality, when you look at this being on the Maidan of Karbala that broke the back of Abu Abdullah and made Abu Abdullah's eyesight leave, you'll know that when you lose a young one, you'll understand the pain of Abu Abdullah. It is the most immense pain that you can never feel. My dear brothers and sisters, and to the family of the marhum, we lost an uncle, we lost a father, we lost a brother. But look at Abu Abdullah al-Hussein on the Maidan of Karbala, my dear brothers and sisters. You see, Abu Abdullah has lost everybody now, and he has his young 18-year-old son, Aliyun Akbar. I would like you to close your eyes and imagine the manzar that Aliyun Akbar comes to his Baba, Abu Abdullah, on the Maidan of Karbala. And what does he do now? Remember, we are mourning a young soul that departed us last year. Now look at this young Najawan. What happens now? Imagine an 18-year-old young soul comes to his Baba and he says, Ya Baba, give me the permission, give me the ijazah to go to the Maidan of Karbala. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, imagine being an old father after losing your brother and losing everybody. You have to give permission to your 18-year-old son. Allahu Akbar. They say, the Maqtal says, Aliyun Akbar would come. Aliyun Akbar would come to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to get the ijazah. And he would come and the Imam would turn him back and say what the Maqtal says. The Imam would say that, oh Aliyun Akbar, you remind me too much of my grandfather Rasulullah. Aliyun Akbar, I cannot let you go to the Maidan of Karbala. Aliyun Akbar, my dear son, would you like to get permission to do one thing for me? The Imam says, go to your Pupi Zainab and go to your mother Layla and ask her for permission. They say that go to your mother and go to your Pupi, the Maqtal says, the Imam would say, and get permission to go to the Maidan of Karbala. Hussein will not let you go like this, my young son. They say Allahu Akbar, Ali Akbar would go towards them, go towards the khayma of Sayyida Zainab, and whenever he would go, the door of the khayma would rise and it would fall, and it would rise and it would fall. The orators and those who have written the Maqtal say that it was like this, that this door of the khayma would fall and drop because the holy ladies of Imam Hussein would not want Ali and Akbar to leave them. They would say, "Oh my beta Ali Akbar, I have raised you my whole life. If you could stay with your puppy," Zainab Salam Allah would say, "if you could stay with your puppy for one more night, this puppy has raised you your whole life. Oh Ali and Akbar, how can this puppy let you go to the Maidan of Karbala? I cannot see you leave, Allahu Akbar." They say that the Maqtal says that Ali and Akbar would get the permission from his puppy finally and from his mother. Just a few more words and your Zahmat is tamam. You see that Ali and Akbar gets the permission, the Maqtal says. Now imagine this Qari al-Jawan, this young son of Abu Abdullah, goes to his father and he bows his head and he says, "Ya Baba, I've got the permission from my puppy Zainab. I've got the ijazah from my mother. Now Baba, let me go towards the Maidan of Karbala." The Maqtal says that Ali and Akbar now mounts the horse and he goes towards the Maidan of Karbala. There's a very ajib manzar. There's a very ajib moment that happens in the Maqtal. What happens? They say that now that Ali and Akbar is going towards the Maidan of Karbala, an ajib manzar happens. You see Abu Abdullah is seeing he sees his son going towards the Maidan. And the Maqtal says that Abu Abdullah, you could hear the footsteps of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein going behind Ali and Akbar. And the Urdu poet says it very beautifully. He says what he puts towards what Abu Abdullah is going through in that moment, the poet does. The poet says that I think that those footsteps of Abu Abdullah keep saying to Ali and Akbar, "More ke mujhe dekhte jana Ali Akbar." He is telling his son Ali and Akbar that keep looking at me, Ali and Akbar. This father of yours is very zaif. He is very old. He cannot hold this musibah of yours in his chest. Keep looking at me when you go to the Maidan of Karbala. You know why I chose this musibah Ali Akbar? Because this musibah Ali Akbar holds a very, very important part in watch. What does it do? The musibah of Ali Akbar has three very important relationships. It has the musibah of Abdullah and his son. It has the puppy and has the puppy and Ali Akbar. And it has one very important relationship that will break your heart. Even when Ali Akbar was going to the Maidan of Karbala, he did not forget his sister that was left behind, and he would not forget her when he was going to the Maidan. Ali Akbar would now go to the Maidan. Abu Abdullah Hussein was following behind. And you see Abu Abdullah is going to the Maidan, following his son. And now Ali Akbar gets struck by one of the mal'oons, and he falls to the Maidan of Karbala. And you see the Neza comes and it goes inside of the chest of Ali Akbar. The Maqtal says, Allahu Akbar, that Ali Akbar falls on the Maidan of Karbala. But like the other martyrs, he does not call out to his Baba. He just says, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. Alaykum minni as-salam. Accept my last salam, ya Baba. Do not come to my lasha. Do not come to my body. It is a very ajib manzar that he does not call his Baba to his body. They say that Ali Akbar is on the Maidan of Karbala, and his Zaif father Hussein is coming behind him, and he hears the cry of Ali Akbar, and he says, Aina Ali Akbar, where are you, my son Ali Akbar? Call out to me. I do not know where you are, Ali Akbar. Call out to me. Ali Akbar, I have lost the sight of my eyes. I do not know where you are. Come towards me, Ali Akbar. Ali Akbar says to his Baba, He says, Baba, do not come to my body. You will not be able to handle the pain, the suffering that you will see, Ya Aba Abdullah. Do not go to the body of Ali Akbar, I say. Ya Aba Abdullah, you will not be able to handle what has happened to the body of Ali Akbar. The Maqtal says that Abu Abdullah, with the loss of his eyesight is gone. He is on his knees. He comes to the Maidan of Karbala, to the body of Ali Akbar. And he says, and the Maqtal says that he is saying, Ya Ali, Aina, Aina, Ya Ali. My mind says that is he calling his Baba Ali in Najaf? Or is he calling his young son on the Maidan of Karbala? He gets to the body of Ali Akbar, and he's there at the Lasha. And what happens now is very ajib. Those who have kids, it'll break your heart, and those who have young sons, it'll break your heart. Abu Abdullah comes to the body of Ali Akbar, and he sees that Ali Akbar is taking his ankle, and he is taking it, and he is rubbing it on the Maidan of Karbala. He is in so much pain that he is taking his foot and he is digging it in the Maidan of Karbala. And he says, Baba, Baba, do not remove my hand from my chest. You will not be able to bear the pain. He says, you will not be able to bear the pain. And then you see that Abu Abdullah says, Ali Akbar, let me see what is behind your hand. Remove your hand, my son. Ali Akbar removes his hand from his chest. And the Maqtal says that when Ali Akbar removes it, Hussein says, Allahu Akbar. He holds on to the Neza. He puts one knee on the Maidan of Karbala. He holds on to the Neza stuck in Ali Akbar's chest. And he pulls it with a cry of Ya Ali. He calls out his Baba Ali. And he takes out the chest of Ali Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Now Hussein, Abu Abdullah, does not know what to do. His Shabi Payambar, the one who used to resemble the Prophet, is on the Maidan of Karbala. Hussein has lost his eyesight, and he is going back to the Khaymaga. And he says, Zainab, I brought back your Ali Akbar. But Ali Akbar was not like how he was when he went to the Maidan of Karbala. The cry of Wa Aliyah was on the Maidan of Karbala. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Muhammad wa Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, inshallah, accept this Qaleel Ibadat of ours and to make us the abs that he wants us to be. We ask him to the musibah of Abu Abdullah and of Ali Akbar and of all the Shahada of Karbala, that he gives our marhum and all the marhumin the highest rank in Jannah, inshallah. And I would like to thank once again all the viewers who watched this Majalis today, inshallah. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Hassan. Jazakallah. Thank you very much. I think we have Tasawwur Abbas for Noah Khani from Pakistan. Are you there, Tasawwur Abbas?
Jisan, let me check if he's here.
While Hassan is testing the Noah Khan, please recite one Surah Fatiha for Syed Waqar Ali Abdi, son of Syed Zaigham Ali Abdi, and all Mahumeen of Abdi family, and especially Shaheed Mohsin Raza. One Surah Fatiha.
Yeah, inshallah, as uncle will move to Ziyarat, inshallah.
Okay. So now I will request Hassan Abdi to recite the Hassan.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا، كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه وبكاته وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. I would like to thank you all the participants, viewers, and particularly the guest participated in this Majlis for Esaal Sawab. Thank you very much, and Khuda Hafiz.
थैंक यू रज़ा अंकल, आपने होस्ट किया, आपका टाइम लिया था मैंने. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. आपने host किया. I took some of your time, but thank you.
No, Jazakallah, Jazakallah. Good Majlis. MashaAllah.
Thank you.
MashaAllah.
चलिए बात करते हैं.
Okay, Khuda Hafiz.